My father, Kenny Grant, he was sort of my inspiration growing up. He was one of the best people I ever looked up to. He was a very charismatic, caring, loving individual, and he loved to have fun, and I always admired him for that. But the sad part about the story is he was severely depressed for most of his life, on and off. Since he turned 17, he started showing symptoms of depression, and that fluctuated throughout his life, and it got quite bad in his 40s. So
yeah, it tends to manifest in the late teens or early 20s because the brain reaches its final stages of development at that point. It was not triggered by particular issues. It was a medical issue for him, right? It was chemical, it was chronic. Was it triggered by any particular life events, or was this just an ongoing medical problem mostly?
There are no events that I'm aware of. I've actually spent a lot of time thinking and contemplating about that because pretty much for all we know, it was a chemical imbalance. It was clinical. But of course, there are always chances that something did happen, maybe something we don't know about. It could have been the way that he grew up. He was the youngest of 8 kids. There are so many things that could have happened in his life that I don't know about that could have triggered this, but it did fluctuate and get worse and worse.
Yeah, the isolation can happen within a large family like that. One thing I've heard a lot of people talk about who were in large families saying, oh, we had to jockey for attention. A lot of stand-up comedians say that the only way to get my mom's attention was to be funny. And so maybe isolation can happen more often when there's so many kids and you're often you can get lost in the shuffle. Tell me about so the last, I guess, years or months of his life as the dominoes fell. What events kind of precipitated his demise?
Sure, I'd love to tell you. So I'd say the last 2 years of his life, they were the most difficult for him and our family. So his depression got quite bad, and we actually moved from Toronto, where we had lived for our whole lives. My dad was born and raised in Toronto, so was I. We decided to move to Stouffville. So we thought that the move would help our family. We thought it would help his situation. He had lost his job and he was resorting to drinking quite often, and he was sort of sitting at home not doing a whole lot, and not being in Toronto with his friends and the rest of his family I think was hard on him. And it's sort of the issue, it just got more and more complex and it just got more difficult for him. And sort of the last 2 months he didn't do a whole lot. Honestly, I came home, he was in really bad states. I saw him in situations and states that I wish I didn't see him in. He did drink quite a bit, and he ultimately did take his life. It was when he was 45, it was 2005. So he took his life, and it was the turning point of my life and my family's life as well. It was expected to a certain extent, but you can't really ever expect that. You always hope that that's not going to be the outcome. As much as the signs and symptoms are there, you always hope that's not going to be the story, that's not going to be the ending. But for him, unfortunately, it was.
How much of it did you understand at such a young age? Like, you'd come home and even if he wasn't intoxicated, if he was just depressed, how much of that was it the elephant in the room, so to speak? Like, you kind of tiptoed around it? Did you try to help him? How did you react to it?
I definitely didn't tiptoe. I'm not a tiptoer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm definitely not.
Yeah.
It was definitely, we were all aware of the situation, my mom, my brother, and I. My brother was 4 years younger than me at the time. I was about 12. I was 12 years old when he passed away. My brother was 8. So we definitely experienced it. We talked a lot about it. My parents were fighting quite a lot at the time because he was on and off medication, and that was definitely not good for his state of mind, fluctuating with the doses and all of that. But I was aware of what was happening, and I knew he was very ill at the time, but it wasn't something that our extended family really knew the extent of at the time. I'm sure some of them did, for sure. But a lot of our family friends, they wouldn't have known what was going on inside those doors during those months in the last year of his life. It was sort of one of those things, like, how do you explain that to people, right? I mean, as much as we needed help at the time, you don't really want it. There's so much shame that comes along with mental health, and also respecting his privacy too, right? I mean, he didn't want us going around talking about it, so we respected that.
And that's the unfortunate thing about how stigma affects the whole situation too. You mentioned shame.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who don't feel sympathy or maybe would have been critical of him.
Sure.
But clearly he needed help. And I mean, this was, I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I say it was a medical emergency.
Yes.
And as far as the medication goes, they do need to improve the medication because, you know, even when it comes to things like schizophrenia or other mental conditions, it doesn't just shut the illness down, it shuts them down.
Yeah.
So they're tired all the time or their senses are dulled. And they just think, this is the way I have to live for the rest of my life.
Yes.
And that's unfortunately why they sometimes choose not to take their medication. But yeah, science has to work on that for sure.
Definitely. I mean, my dad was he was quite a firecracker. He had quite the personality. Always knew how to make people laugh and smile. He had one of the most contagious smiles, and he was just such a good time. So when you said that, it was so true. When he was taking the medication, he felt as if he was dulled. His personality was dulled. He was no longer able to be who he was. So I think that definitely played a role in him not taking his medication.
Yeah, and one thing sometimes that comes up when someone takes their own life, in terms of the way their family reacts, there can be anger. Was there anger, or did you just feel loss, or was it both?
It was everything. It was a compilation. I think it sort of went in stages. When he initially passed away, I remember not crying for about a week until his funeral, or a few days until we had it. I was in this state of, I guess I would classify it as a passive denial. I don't really know how else to explain it. It was like I had this feeling as if he would just come home.
I know what you,
right?
I know what you mean. Like,
it's like, this can't be real. There's no way.
There is a strange kind of surreal unreality about death sometimes where you can't believe it's actually happened.
Yes.
Can't believe they're gone. Yeah.
Yes. And, you know, I was 12 years old, and his death wasn't my first experience with death by any means, but it was the first close to home death. And I denied it in my mind. I felt as if it was a joke, like, no, this is not real. This can't be real. So I lived in that state for about a week or two. And it did sort of come in and out for the next 2 years after that. But I felt very confused. Afterwards, I was confused. I started to understand, okay, he is gone. So why did he do this? And then with that comes a lot of sadness. I think sadness for me came before the anger, which I've read is backwards from how it normally happens. Usually you're angry first and then you're sad. But for me, I was really sad first. And just, I felt as if I had lost half of my support system, which essentially I did, right? You have a mom and dad, and I lost half of it. I felt very close to him as well. We spent a lot of time together. We had a lot of memories. So that it made it very difficult. He was just, I didn't feel as if I had that guidance anymore when I wanted nothing more than his guidance for the rest of my life. So I felt lost.
Did you seek any kind of alternative role models? I mean, you still had your mother, of course. Sometimes people compensate if they lose a parent. Do you feel like you've ever done that? Like you sought guidance from other people?
I never sought guidance from other people in terms of a mentor figure or father figure, but I did seek connection in others. So after he passed away, and when I sort of got my feet back on the ground and went back to school, it was very difficult, but I sought comfort in social situations. So always surrounding myself with people, getting to know people, just distracting myself that way, and learning about people's different worlds, their different lives. It fascinates me. So I sought comfort in that way.
What was it like to go back to school? I'm sure a lot of the students must have found out about it. So was it kind of a phase where people are kind of looking at you funny or anything like that? Were you treated differently?
Yeah, definitely. I was a very social kid in grade 7, grade 6 and 7. So when he passed away, that was my age group. And when I went back to the school, it was in Stouffville, so it was quite a small school, and actually everybody was notified. So pretty much every single student, my brother was at the same school, so everyone knew. And when I came back, I had the looks, I had the awkward moments, but it's natural. People feel uncomfortable, and I understood that. And the way that I dealt with it is I just pretended like everything was okay. So that became my way to cope, because the way that my dad passed away was so traumatic and just really graphic for people to think about. And I found a lot of the times that they were so uncomfortable that I had to compensate by being extra okay and extra comfortable and totally fine so that they could just relax. And so that's how I dealt with that.
Did he leave a note or any kind of explanation for what had led to his distress and his depression?
He did. He left a note. My mom found the note, and I read it years later. We took it out of the safety deposit box, and I was allowed to read it if I wanted, and I did. And to be honest, I was disappointed. It wasn't what I wanted it to be, but it was more so logistics and everything that he had planned for after. But there was maybe a line or two dedicated to my brother and I. So at first I was upset, but afterwards I remembered, and I was told by many friends and family, and I knew this the whole time he was alive. He loved my brother and I more than anything. Like, we were his pride and joy, and he showed that and proved it with his actions every day. So I don't stress about the note. I realize I can't even imagine what state of mind he must have been in when he was writing it. So I didn't give it too much thought, honestly.
Sure. And Christmas is coming up. That must be a hard time of year as well. I mean, that's such it's the family holiday more than any other. What kind of feelings come up at this time of year, particularly in December?
I found Christmas was really hard the first few years, probably the first 3 or 4. And my grandfather spent Christmas with us after my dad passed away and before my mom had met anybody else. But now, honestly, it's been 13 years, and I'm used to it now. I'm used to it. I think about him all the time. I think about him every single day. It doesn't matter if it's a holiday or not. But I definitely think about him more on Christmas, but it doesn't make me more sad with him not being there.
Sure. Well, I think you'd be very proud of the person you grew up to be.
Oh, thank you so much.
You graduated from college and you started this organization to help other people.
Yeah.
Have you ever come in contact with a student who's had this experience that you have, or anything close to it?
Definitely. Suicide is it's a lot more common, I've come to find. The more I've been open about it, the more people are open to me about it. So I've never met a girl who's lost her father to suicide. So that I haven't experienced that yet. I'm sure there's someone out there and I will meet them. But there's 2 of they're my second cousins. So it's my dad's cousin, Angie. She also took her life not too long ago.
Were you close to her as well?
I wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't too close to her, but she has 2 girls. And so I'd assume that I would say that's the closest to home situation. I can't even imagine what they would have gone through. Well, I guess I can imagine, but it's a totally different situation. So, yeah, that's definitely the closest to home, comparable.
Do you think there may be a genetic link to depression in your family?
Yes.
Yeah, it can be inherited for sure.